Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Working Conversations podcast, where we talk all things leadership, business communication, and trends in organizational life. I'm your host, Dr. Janel Anderson. Research at the end of 2023 projected that 90% of companies would be requiring staff to return to the office by the end of 2024. But remote workers are saying, not so fast. The tension is continuing to mount, and return to office has become a hot button issue between many employees and the companies they work for. Why go back if there's nothing of value there? Employees ask. New research shows that there is not significant performance gains from large companies who are requiring their employees to come back. So what's to be done about all this? Well, I've got some ideas for employers to consider if and when they ask employees to come back to the office, and that's what we're going to dive into today. First of all, let me preface this with who we're talking about here. Employees in technology, finance and accounting, sales and marketing, project management, just to name a few of the industry sectors who can work remotely. But let's not forget that over 60% of the American workforce do not have jobs that can be done remotely. Frontline jobs in healthcare, hospitality, law enforcement, manufacturing, logistics, and so many more industries absolutely require that people be on site. And many organizations have some of each, some of those back office jobs that can be done remotely, and some of those customer-facing or hands-on jobs that must be done on site. Those companies are really trying to find their way through this situation to create fairness and equity for their employees. So they've got an extra hard challenge, if you will. Okay, so now that we know that we're talking about just slightly under 40% of the American workers to begin with, let's look at some of the dynamics. United Parcel Service, UPS, a logistics company, Boeing, who makes airplanes, JP Morgan Chase, a financial institution, all of those companies and so many more have been starting to require 5 days per week. Now, part of their perspective is that because they have frontline workers who do need to be on site to do those jobs, whether that be frontline employees in a bank or building an airplane or delivering those packages that we all so much rely on, they have people who are on both ends of the spectrum in terms of the flexibility that can be afforded them in their workplace. We'll talk more about flexibility as we get into the later part of the podcast episode, like what organizations can do to mitigate some of this potential unfairness and give employees who must be on site some additional flexible work arrangements, even if that doesn't necessarily mean working at home. But I'm getting my head ahead of myself here. So those companies have employees who are on both sides of the coin. And again, I think they are trying to be fair to the employees who need to be on site as they're asking the office workers to come back as well. But we do potentially run the risk of forgetting, or companies run the risk of forgetting, that people's lives were upended with the pandemic, and many of them made substantial changes in how their work and lives are arranged. Companies have also waffled on their position. First, saying work from home should be a permanent change, and they gave people permission to move and make big lifestyle changes because they thought everything was going permanently remote. And then companies had an about face. Back in the office, they said, without much regard for the changes that their employees made in their lives in big ways during the pandemic. We can take a look at a couple of other specific case studies as well. Zoom is quite ironic. They are now on a structured hybrid model where 2 days per week, if in the office, if you live near one of the Zoom offices. And again, rather ironic when you think of the role that Zoom played for people initially and continuing to work remotely. Rather ironic that they're asking people to be back in the office 2 days per week. You've probably heard me talk about Morgan Stanley, AT&T, Disney, and Apple all doing something similar, asking people to be back in the office a certain number of days per week, anywhere from 2 to 4. Those return to office initiatives may be getting stricter in the near term and expanding to more and more companies. Google, Amazon, and Salesforce, which is the customer relationship management tool that's used in a lot of sales organizations, and also the parent company of Slack, an online collaboration tool, also very ironic, are also pushing for their employees to return to the office in larger numbers, more days per week. I've also noted before and reported in an earlier episode that employees from the investment firm Vanguard told a reporter at the Wall Street Journal that Vanguard employees were required to return to the office or they would lose their job, essentially be fired. No severance package, not a layoff situation, just flat out fired. And Vanguard's not alone in that. There are increasingly large numbers of organizations who are telling their people they have to come back into the office anywhere from 2 to 5 days per week in order to avoid getting fired. So they're essentially threatening their employees' livelihoods or their employees' jobs over this return to office issue. Now, a new report out by the University of Pittsburgh business professor Mark Ma suggests that it is short-sighted of employers to force their employees back into the office. His research indicated that return to office mandates hurt morale and employee satisfaction, and having employees back on site does not necessarily show meaningful gains. The company's performance and the employees' productivity did not necessarily increase in a significant manner. Now, the research that he and his colleague did examined overall job satisfaction and work-life balance after return to office mandates were put in place at companies within the S&P 500 indexed companies. As a measure for whether or not it made a difference to be back in the office, the researchers looked at the company's overall financial performance to see if there was a significant gain, a significant difference when employees were required to be back on site. And it might not surprise you to find out there wasn't any significant gain. So interesting now that the empirical data is starting to come out that doesn't necessarily support higher performance being back on site. Well, let's take a closer look at what's going on for the percentage of people who want to continue to work from home. And part of the impetus of this episode came from a listener who emailed me, and I welcome your emails. I read your emails. And I think that perhaps the last episode that I did on the whole work from home versus return to office, that was episode 148, is the return to office war over. I think I may have come out sounding as if I were on the employer side of the issue. Now, I like to be impartial and I like to present all sides of an issue, especially when it is something as controversial as this. And what I was attempting to do in that episode was to explain to employees why employers want them back. I think that perhaps I did not give it even-handed coverage. When I think about that episode, I think, again, it may have easily come off as I was trying to persuade people to come back into the office. I was just trying to let people know why employers want you back into the office. Well, anyway, I got a great email that really provoked my thinking on this and led to this next episode. Because, again, I do want to take a closer look at what's going on for those people who do want to continue to work from home. So let's look at the work part first, and then let's look at the lifestyle employee part for those employees. And then I'll conclude with some advice for how companies might handle the situation better, and certainly without threatening to fire people. So first, organizations really need to define the purpose for an office presence. Why do people need to come back into the office? Why does it matter? So clearly defining the purpose of in-office work is absolutely crucial to get employee buy-in. If employees understand that the office is a space for collaboration, innovation, and high-impact activities, they're more likely to see the value in being physically present. But if you're asking people to come in and be on Teams or Zoom calls with people in other locations or even people inside the same building, what is the value of doing this from the office? One source who's close to me has explained that the very loose requirement that their organization has of being in the office 3 days per week is what the guidelines are for their job, but no one they work with directly works out of the same office or is required to be in on the exact same days. So they don't find value at all in the hassle of going into the office. But I'm getting ahead of myself here with some of the lifestyle issues. But the number one issue really is this: what value does being in the office add? Now, I will be quick to point out that it's easier to have those cross-pollination conversations with those that you don't work with directly, and that it's good for new employees to meet people. But for the person who's worked there for years, well, those just aren't as valuable, and it's not as compelling to get yourself back into the office for somebody else's gain. Yes, they are valuable to new employees, those in-person interactions, and it's especially valuable for new employees to be learning from their counterparts who've been around with the organization for a while. But if there isn't any direct and tangible value to the employee who's been around for quite some time, it's a really hard sell. So the first thing is, you have to make a case, a business case, for why it matters for employees to be in the office, and then you have to back that up to make sure that that actually happens. Now, we also need to look at the personalized work environment. Half of global companies have cut their commercial real estate space, and what's left is used primarily for hoteling. That is, you plunk down with your laptop in whatever space is available. You might not have your second monitor there to plug into, or there might not be a second monitor on the hoteling desk that you sit down at. Certainly, you don't have your ergonomic keyboard and your mouse with you, or a comfortable chair that's set up to your liking. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Most people have other kinds of amenities in their home offices that make it comfortable and easy to work there as well. This lack of personalization of employees' work environments can result in discomfort, lack of focus, lower productivity, and an overall lower sense of job satisfaction. Meanwhile, their home office that they have meticulously attended to and designed over the past few years during the pandemic sits vacant, while they feel untethered in their hoteling situation. So again, there is a lack of personalization in the work environment, because gone are the days when everybody had their own office or even their own cubicle. So that's another big reason that people are not finding it compelling to come into the workplace, and that's related to the work and the work environment. But now let's look at a few of the lifestyle costs of coming into the office on a regular basis. Commuting is chief among the concerns. In fact, there's lots and lots of headlines about how taxing it is on people to commute once again. So why does this matter? Commuting challenges can be a significant source of stress and cost for employees. Commuting takes time. Dressing for the office may be different than dressing for remote work, so there may be additional clothing costs and dry cleaning and laundering costs as well. And of course, that's not to overlook the increased costs associated with actually commuting itself, such as gas money or public transportation costs, parking fees, and so on. Not to mention, some couples dropped down to one automobile per household, and they may not live in an area with reliable public transportation, so they might not even have a car to get to work every day. And then there's also the potentially higher food costs with lunches and coffees that are no longer being prepared at home. All of this adds up to potentially have a significant impact on employees' finances. Again, making it less desirable from a financial aspect to come back to the office. Now, we also need to consider employee well-being. Whether you want to call it work-life balance or something else, the considerations for employees as human beings should be a priority. If remote work has proven effective and employees have adjusted well to working from home and have maintained or even increased their productivity, forcing a return to the office without tangible benefits may lead to stress and dissatisfaction, negatively impacting their well-being. Now, we also need to take into consideration where people live. As I mentioned earlier, some companies had promoted work from home as a permanent change, and people believed them. The employees who worked for them believed them, and they moved, sometimes clearly across the country, making it completely unrealistic to come back to the office when now their employer has waffled on that issue and changed the policy and is asking them back. It's rather ridiculous. So with all of this as the backdrop, both some specific concerns for the work itself and then some concerns for the work-life balance and the employee well-being, well, it's easy to understand why employees are balking at the idea of returning to the office and becoming incensed with the mandates that we've been hearing about and the threats for firing. So what do we do about it? Well, here's where my advice to employers come in. This is not for employees. If you are listening and you are an employee who is being asked to come back to the office, I want you to share this episode with your manager, your director, your human resources professional, any and all of those people. So this is my advice to employers. Handle with care. And I've got 3 pieces of concrete advice for employers as they navigate this uncomfortable space. Number 1, back your decision with a business case that is compelling. If you are requiring people to come back into the office, whether that's 1 day a month or 5 days a week or somewhere in between, explain why and make a good business case for it with data, actual data. When companies openly share the reasons behind the decision to the return to the office and the data that supports it, it provides clarity and context, and it helps employees understand the larger picture. Again, support your argument with hard data about how it helps the business and make the business case for it. If you can't make a business case, rethink your policy. The same goes true for just about anything else in your business. Let's say it's a marketing campaign. If there is not a good business case for that marketing campaign, guess what? The marketing campaign should get axed. Likewise with your return to office policy. If you cannot make a good business case for it, you should not be moving forward with it. Number 2, balance employee well-being with organizational needs. Now, not all jobs are created the same. Not all individual circumstances are the same. Focus on creating flexible work arrangements for everyone, not just for those who can work from home. This is going to put an element of fairness back into the equation that is for those companies that have people who are both frontline workers as well as people who are in jobs that could easily be done remotely. This is going to add that element of fairness back in. So if you have logistics staff, warehouse staff, and manufacturing staff and frontline employees and so on, find ways to create flexible work arrangements for them. I did an episode on that where you can get a ton of ideas. It's episode 107, Warning, Flexible Work Arrangements Are Not Optional. And we'll link that episode up in the show notes to make it easy for you to find. So this could include hybrid models, staggered schedules, job sharing, other kinds of creative solutions that promote collaboration and getting the work done while catering to the role that the person plays and also to their individual work styles, job responsibilities, and so on, giving flexibility to those who need to be on site. Again, when adding this element of fairness back in, it might make it feel not so pressing that you need to have those who can work remotely back in the office as much as you are demanding of them now. So number 2 is balance employee well-being with organizational needs. And number 3, consider alternatives to threatening to terminate employment. This is especially true if your organization made a promise to employees that you were going permanently remote a number of years ago. They took you at your word and they made lifestyle choices accordingly. If they didn't want to work for you, they would have already left. I believe they still want to work for you, and you need to honor the promise that you made to them rather than threaten them. Threatening them is not a good motivator, not for retention, not for coming back into the office, and certainly not for talking you up amongst their friends. Nor does it do anything to garner higher employee engagement and satisfaction. My company is threatening to fire me for not returning to the office. It's such a great place to work, said no one ever. Instead of threatening them, hold discussions, hold conversations with employees around performance metrics, individualized agreements, or other incentives that align with organizational goals without resorting to extreme measures, whether they be legitimate threats to fire people or simply hyperbole. You might also set up performance-based agreements in which if employees' performance excels, then their location is irrelevant. If their performance is suffering and you're unable to coach them back up to acceptable performance standards, then they need to come back into the office. Now, you might even end up coaching them right out of the organization, which may be a win for both of you. So, number 3, consider alternatives to threatening to terminate employment. It's just a bad move. All right, so those are your 3 strategies, companies, for handling this admittedly difficult situation. Number 1, back your decision to come back into the office with a business case that has hard data and is compelling. Number 2, balance employee well-being with organizational needs and come up with creative solutions for flexible work arrangements for everybody, not just your work from home employees. And number 3, consider alternatives to threatening to terminate employment. Now, you can count on me to keep tabs on this ever-evolving situation. And if you have comments, ideas, or other ways to contribute to the conversation, hit me up on email at drjanelanderson.com or find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the places. LinkedIn, of course, as well. And remember, the future of work is not only about technology, it's about the values that we uphold, the communities we build, and the sustainable growth we strive for. We need to keep exploring, keep innovating, and keep envisioning the remarkable possibilities that do, in fact, lie ahead. If you enjoy this content and you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and knock that little bell so that you get notified every time there's a new podcast episode out. I'm also putting YouTube shorts and other types of videos there as well. So even if you're listening on a podcast player, you want to head over to YouTube.com/Janel Anderson, PhD, and hit subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. Wherever you're listening or watching, please leave me a review. It helps other listeners find me, and that gives us broader reach. Until next time, my friends, be well.